Will you please join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Rick Lynch?
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. So when I introduce myself, never do I talk about the rank that I achieved or the position that I held. I introduce myself as Sarah's husband and the father of Susan Lucas, and thank God the grandfather now of Rex and JW and Piper Ann. When Sarah and I transitioned from the military back in January of 12, we thought about it, we prayed about it. What are we going to do with the rest of our lives? And we chose to only do meaningful and substantive work around people with shared values. That's why immediately we partnered with HEB and Central Market, because I've never seen an organization now nationwide who cares more about the people that they serve. This idea of they make the lives of Texans better is phenomenal. Not just educators, but as Winnell says, they spend a lot of time providing services and showing appreciation to members of the military, both past and present, and their families under this thing we call Operation Appreciation. So for both Stephen and Winnell, God bless you both and the organizations that you lead, because you make such a difference every day. Sarah and I are honored to be in your presence, and I don't use that word lightly. You know, we travel all the time. We make a speech around the nation about once a week. Many times we're in the presence of senior politicians like the president or members of Congress. We're in the presence of actors and actresses, professional athletes, but I don't ever feel like I'm honored to be in their presence like I feel right now. Like was mentioned, I believe the two most important elements for society are our service members who protect our freedoms and our way of life, and our educators who guarantee our future. And unfortunately, we as a nation recognize those two groups the least, and I'll talk about that. I'm so proud of what's happened here in the Fort Worth Independent School District for both the board and the superintendent. I've seen all the things that are taking place. I've seen the progress that's happened recently, 40% increase in college scholarships. I love the vision of 100 by 2025. I love the focus on universal pre-K and STEM and leadership academies. Well done. You're doing godly work. But I make this point all the time. Vision without resources is hallucination. Vision without resources is hallucination. Maybe I ought to be speaking to the state legislature when it comes to resources for our school districts. But that's a true statement. You can have all the vision in the world, but if you don't apply the resources to accomplish the task at hand, you're just having an hallucination. And resources come primarily in three categories. One is time. Have you got sufficient time? That's why I love the idea based on a strategic plan that you're giving yourself to 2025 to reach that 100% literacy in the third grade. It comes in money. And I know you don't ever have as much money as you'd like to have, but that is a resource. But the most important resource is the people. And in your case, I love all educators. I love administrators. I love everybody involved in educating our children. But tonight I'm going to focus on the teachers, our most precious resource when it comes to educating our children. I'm embarrassed with our nation, with a lot of the silly things that I hear all the time. And candidly, there's very few things I can speak with authority about, but one of those things is teaching, because I've been blessed to be married to a professional educator for the last 34 years. So I see what teachers with a passion have to go through. So when somebody stops me and says, you know, teachers only work 9 months out of the year, that's silly. I've never seen human beings work harder than the teachers that I've been around, my wife included. This idea that they work 9 months out of the year, that's ludicrous. They're going in early, they're staying late, they're working over the summer, they're focused on doing the right things for the right reasons. Then they say, what do teachers make? Which I find to be ludicrous as well. See, for example, a soldier, to include me, you don't join the United States military because you want to make a lot of money. That's not what you joined the military for. You joined the military to protect our freedoms and our way of life. You know, we haven't had a draft since 1973. Everybody that's fighting for our freedoms today is a volunteer. And those youngsters on the streets of Afghanistan today, I can tell you what they're going through because I was there with them. It's about 110 degrees. They're wearing 70 pounds of body armor. They're getting shot at or blown up with an IED. And we as a nation are paying them $1,800 a month on average. But they volunteer to serve to protect our freedoms and our way of life. That's what teachers do. You don't become a teacher because you want to make a lot of money. This idea that what do teachers make is the silliest question that I hear, because that's not relevant to the conversation. What they do make is they make a difference in the lives of their students. What they do make is they make their students be the best they can do. They do make their students learn to read and write and ask questions and be inquisitive, be the best that they can be. That's what teachers make. So I look back on my life, and you can do the same thing. Right now, you could close your eyes and pick out those teachers who impacted your life. I remember Mrs. Thurn, my kindergarten teacher, what she made is she made a young person who respected others, who learned to play well with others. She made a young person who learned how to take naps. And I enjoy that today, by the way. That's an important skill set to have. Mrs. Vogel and Mrs. Junkin, my first and second grade teachers, they made this young man focus on learning to read and learning to write. And oh, by the way, I'm still in contact today with Mrs. Junkin, my second grade teacher. Mrs. Johnson, my fourth grade teacher, she made this young man have humility, because I thought I was a pretty smart kid. I was sitting there in the front of the fourth grade class. I always had my hand up. I was always answering questions. And one day she brought a student, a fourth grade student from another class in, had the young man stand right in front of me and recited every state in alphabetical order and the capital of every state. Right then I learned humility, because I couldn't do that, but he could. Mr. Mazingo in high school, he made me love math and trigonometry and calculus. By the way he taught, he'd bring a guitar to class every day, and he made learning fun. And Gene Bible, he made physics interesting. So those skill sets that they made in me served me well when I went to United States Military Academy at West Point and when I went to MIT to study robotics. You know, my parents taught me a work ethic. My dad only had a 7th grade education. He thought that's all he needed. He was working at the paper factory. My mom only had 11th grade education. They taught me a work ethic, but my teachers taught me how to question, how to study, how to search. And then of all the teachers who touched my life, the most important was Eileen Lowell. She was my guidance counselor when I was a junior in high school. And I remember vividly, like it was yesterday, walking into her office and saying, "Ma'am, my parents can't afford to send me to college. They both work at the paper factory. We have no money. Do I have any options?" And she said, "Well, you can attend these things called a military academy." I said, "Really?" I said, "How much do they cost?" She says, "Nothing. They pay you to go." That sounded pretty cool to me, getting paid to go to college. So I applied to West Point in Annapolis. I got my West Point acceptance on a Monday. My Annapolis acceptance the very next day, the Naval Academy. The only reason I went to West Point is because I got the acceptance the day before. I tell folks the postman truly determined my fate. So Mrs. Thurn, Mrs. Vogel, Mrs. Junkin, Mr. Mozingo, Mr. Bible, and Mrs. Lowell, what they made was a general, a United States Army 3-star general. They did that. And that's what you're doing in your classrooms now. You're making the future. One of your youngsters is going to grow up to be somebody special. They'll all be something special. But somebody's going to be the general. Somebody's going to be the president. Somebody's going to be the astronaut. Somebody's going to be that CEO who worries about how much teachers make. So God bless the teachers. I'm going to give you 2 things to think about, because I have a passion for leader development and to help people. You can't have transformational education if you don't have adaptive leaders and administrators So I wrote a book about adaptive leadership. I traveled the nation, talk about it, and I'll give you the 3 highlights. Ask yourself tonight when you go home these 3 questions. First, do you have a positive attitude? I focus on opportunities, not obstacles. And that's what an adaptive leader has to do. Every day when you come to work or when you go home, you're confronted with a challenge. You're making the decision as the leader whether that's going to be an opportunity or an obstacle. Quick military story. I'm commanding 25,000 soldiers at Fort Stewart, Georgia in 2006. And the plan was I'd take those soldiers into northern Iraq, the most peaceful part of Iraq, and I'd take them there in 6 months. One day I get a call from the Army leadership. They tell me that President Bush, regardless of what the polls told him to do, he decided to surge troops into Iraq because we, the senior military, told him we needed more troops on the ground. So I get this call from the Army leadership. They say, hey, change of mission for you and your 25,000 soldiers. You're no longer going into northern Iraq, the most peaceful part. You're going into southern Iraq, the worst part of Iraq. It was called the Triangle of Death. We didn't have any soldiers in there for a long period of time, so the terrorists took that place over. So I made a mental note. Okay, we're not going from the north, we're going into the south. And then in the next breath, the Army leader told me, you got to be there in 6 weeks. We had 6 months to prepare for northern Iraq. Now we're going to the worst part of Iraq in 6 weeks. What are you going to do? I put down the phone. What do you think the first thing I did was? I dropped to my knees and I prayed. I asked God to give me the strength and courage and wisdom to get us through those difficult and challenging times. I called my wife because she always gives me cogent advice and counsel. And we walked outside to my leaders. And I told them, we have an opportunity. Finally, we're going to have enough troops to turn Iraq around. We're going to go there, we're going to get there in 6 weeks, and we're going to establish freedom for the Iraqi people. And that's exactly what happened. So if I had not came out positive, upbeat positive, and I came out rather and said, man, can you believe it? Can you believe what they think we're going to do? They're going to put us in the worst part of Iraq. We got to be there in 6 weeks. If I'd have done that, what would the organization have done? It was like a balloon that had been deflated. Everybody would have started looking down. Nothing would have happened. It happens in your classrooms. It happens in your schools. It happens in the district. So when you see something that causes you frustration and concern, I recommend you think about it, you pray about it, you talk to folks around you, your inner circle, and then you come out upbeat and positive. Focus on the opportunity, not the obstacle. I talk about engaged leadership. I argue that leaders should love those people entrusted to their care like they love their own children. And I know that's what teachers do because I know that's what my wife did. Even to this day, she can cite the names of the children in her class. And even to this day, those children, now adults, contact my wife and thank her for the time she taught them, was their teacher. Engaged leadership is important. Love those people entrusted you care like you love yourself. Ask yourself tonight, are you truly an engaged leader? Are you demonstrating on a daily basis love and encouragement and enrichment? And the last thing I'll leave with you is ask yourself about time management. How are you doing with time management? Are you a good time manager? Because if you're not nearly as successful as you could be, and you'll not be nearly as effective as you should be. So if you haven't taken the time management classes, so learn how to do it all, I recommend you do that. So attitude, engagement, and time management. Focus on being a more adaptive leader. Not because somebody's going to pay you some more or because somebody's going to promote you. Do it because it's the right thing to do, and you'll be a better teacher and administrator if you do. I worry about our nation. We're a nation at risk. We got external threats like Russia and North Korea and ISIS and Iran and Syria. You hear about it in the news every day. Unfortunately, the national media plays it up worse than it truly is, but it's still out there as a problem. And then we have internal threats as a nation, which I worry about more than the external threats. I worry about domestic terrorism. I worry about divisive people who are trying to separate elements of our society. And I'm really worried about lack of respect for law enforcement personnel and our nation's first responders. Those things we got to work on. You are anxious, you are fearful, and you are concerned. And it's not just you, we all are. So in my presentations, people have asked me over the last 3 years, well, General, how can it be that you led 25,000 soldiers in Iraq as part of the surge, that you ran the largest installation in the free world, you were personally negotiating with the insurgents, you were blowed up in a large motor pool at the end of Desert Shield and Desert Storm. How can it be that you don't appear to be anxious or fearful or concerned? So I decided to write the second book. And I thank HEB and Central Market for purchasing those second book for us. So I want you to read that book because I wrote it for the express purpose to give you some ideas in this difficult time. In the military, we call it volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you're anxious and concerned and fearful, how can you indeed be less so? I argue it's by strengthening your relationship with God. The book's not about religion, it's about spiritual fitness and turning to God daily in prayer and asking Him to be with you, and He will be. So I'll leave you with a story about the dash. You know, I'm a man of faith. My mom passed 10 years ago. I know that she's in heaven. I know we'll be together again for all eternity. God tells me so in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. Unfortunately, my dad, when he was still alive, he didn't have that same faith. So he was convinced Mom was where we planted her remains in the cemetery. So every time I'd go back to Hamilton, Ohio, he'd say, boy, let's go visit your mom. And we go into the cemetery. What do you see when you go into a cemetery? You see a tombstone. And on a tombstone, you see a name, and you see a start date and an end date. And we all have a start date. We all have our date of birth. And unfortunately, it's true that we all have an end date. And we don't know if that end date is tomorrow or decades from tomorrow. What do you see between the start date and the end date? You see a dash. And every day, all of us, members of this thing called humanity, every day we ask ourselves, how are we living our dash? And I got to tell you, for you teachers and for you educators, you're living the dash by touching lives and making a difference. You are truly living a life that God will reward. On behalf of myself and my beautiful wife, Sarah, God bless you all. And for those teachers who are finalists, well done. But remember, as your superintendent says, what you have to do is leaders don't just develop followers. Leaders develop other leaders. God bless you all. Thank you.